Can you believe 100 things that define 1970s Britain have been completely erased from our lives? The shocking part. Many were genuinely brilliant innovations that deserved to survive. Instead, corporate takeovers, safety scares, and shifting fashions wiped out an entire decade of distinctly British culture. From the prized but uncomfortable bikes that defined childhoods to the confectionery that tasted like chemical optimism, everything that made the 70s unique has vanished. And it all started with a sweet that parents were convinced would kill their children. Space dust arrived in 1978 and immediately sparked panic among parents convinced it would explode inside children's stomachs. This powdered popping candy contained carbon dioxide at 730 pounds per square inch. The urban legend about stomach ruptures was complete nonsense, but schools banned it anyway. General Foods discontinued it by 1982 because controversy destroyed sales. But that wasn't the only chocolate bar that completely vanished from British shops. The Texan Bar launched in 1973 with the slogan, "Sure is a mighty chew." This tooth-breaking chocolate, nougat and toffee could last an entire bus journey. Each bar weighed 50 grams and cost just 6 pence. Rowntree Mackintosh manufactured it until 1984 when they rationalised their product range. From chocolate bars, let's move to the forgotten frozen convenience foods. Findus crispy pancakes launched in 1974, a sophisticated frozen food. These weren't actual pancakes, they were breadcrumbed savoury parcels filled with minced beef, chicken or cheese. Findus sold over 150 million in 1977 alone. They disappeared in the late 1990s when Swedish ownership discontinued British products. Speaking of international cuisine, here's another British interpretation that was nothing like reality. Vesta chow mein represented British attempts at international cuisine, bearing no resemblance to actual Chinese food. The box contained dehydrated vegetables, dried noodles, and sauce sachet. Vesta sold over 20 million boxes in 1975. The product still exists but has been completely reformulated. Now for the sweets that dominated every corner shop counter. Spangles were square-shaped boiled sweets Mars manufactured from 1950 until 1984. They came in unusual flavours like Old English or acid drop that could strip tooth enamel. Each sweet was individually wrapped in waxed paper that stuck to the sweet. Mars sold over 200 million packs annually. And speaking of distinctive sweets, here's one you couldn't eat slowly. Pacers were green-striped mint chews Mars launched in 1972 to compete with Polo mints. Each sweet featured diagonal green and white stripes with texture between soft toffee and chewing gum. The slogan, "The sweet you can't eat slow," was absolutely accurate. They discontinued Pacers in 1984. Time to shift from sweets to the cars that embarrassed British engineering. The Austin Allegro launched in 1973 as British Leyland's answer to the Ford Escort. It featured a controversial square steering wheel and appalling build quality with panel gaps you could fit fingers through. British Leyland manufactured over 640,000 between 1973 and 1982, despite being objectively terrible. But not all British Leyland products were disasters, as this next car proves. The Triumph Dolomite Sprint arrived in 1973, hitting 150 miles per hour with 0 to 60 in 8.4 seconds. Powered by a 2.0-litre 16-valve engine producing 127 brake horsepower, Triumph manufactured only 22,941 between 1973 and 1980. Unfortunately, it suffered the same British Leyland electrical problems and notorious rust, from cars to the fashion disasters that somehow seemed brilliant at the time. Platform shoes reached genuinely absurd heights during the 1970s, with soles routinely measuring 5 inches or more. These weren't just women's fashion. Men wore platform boots with equal enthusiasm. Multiple people died falling off platform shoes. They disappeared almost overnight in 1979 when punk declared them hopelessly uncool. And if platforms weren't bad enough, there was the layered look. Tank tops were sleeveless knitted waistcoats every British man apparently needed during the mid-70s. Patterns featured geometric designs or stripes in browns, oranges and harvest golds. British knitwear manufacturers produced millions annually. Tank tops vanished completely by 1980, becoming associated with embarrassing dads. Now let's explore the beers that sparked a real ale revolution. Watneys Red Barrel was the keg bitter that became shorthand for everything wrong with British beer. This pressurised, pasteurised beer launched nationally in 1971. The campaign for real ale was literally founded to fight against it. Despite opposition, it sold millions of pints. Watneys discontinued it in 1979, and Watneys wasn't the only keg bitter facing camera's wrath. Double Diamond was in Coop's keg bitter that peaked around 1972, brewing over 2 million barrels annually. The slogan, "A Double Diamond works wonders," convinced millions to drink what Camera described as fizzy, sweetened dishwater. Sales collapsed by 1977 as real ale made a comeback, from beers to the toys that made childhood distinctly dangerous. The Rally Chopper launched in 1969 but dominated the 70s bicycle market. With high-rise handlebars, banana seat, and gear stick mounted like a sports car, Rally manufactured over 1.5 million. It cost around £32 at launch and was quite dangerous with high centre of gravity. And speaking of dangerous toys, table football was surprisingly competitive. Striker was Palitoy's table football game launching in 1970. The original featured sturdy metal frame and proper ball-bearing action. Palitoy sold over 300,000 during the 1970s. The standard version retailed for £7.99 and the deluxe with electronic scoring cost £12.99. Time to explore the television programmes that made weekends compulsory viewing. The Golden Shot ran on ITV from 1967 to 1975 as compulsory Sunday afternoon viewing. The format involved contestants directing a blindfolded cameraman to fire a crossbow at targets. Bob Monkhouse hosted from 1967 to 1972. The show regularly pulled over 15 million viewers, and another ITV show featured talent contests judged by audience applause via the clapometer. Opportunity Knocks was ITV's talent show running from 1956 to 1978. Huey Green hosted with his distinctive Canadian-American accent, measuring audience applause via the clapometer. It regularly achieved 18 to 20 million viewers. The show launched Lena Zavaroni and Pam Ayres. Now for the forgotten music acts that vanished from the charts almost immediately. Chicory Tip scored a #1 hit in 1972 with Son of My Father, the first British chart topper featuring a Moog synthesizer prominently. The song sold over 750,000 copies and stayed at #1 for 3 weeks. They never matched this success. And another one-hit wonder captured 1974 with their retro doo-wop sound. The Rubettes burst onto the scene in 1974 with Sugar Baby Love, selling over 2 million copies. The band was essentially a studio creation put together for this song. It reached #1 in May and stayed for 4 weeks. Punk rock made their retro style seem embarrassingly old-fashioned. Let's explore the high street shops that were fixtures in every British town. Freeman Hardy Willis operated over 1,000 stores during the 1970s. The company originated from 3 separate retailers merging in 1929. By 1975, they employed over 8,000 people and sold approximately 15 million pairs of shoes annually. British Shoe Corporation owned them. Another high street fixture was the electrical retailer with its distinctive blue shopfront. Rumbelows was the electrical retailer operating over 280 stores during its peak. The company sold everything from televisions to washing machines. The chain employed approximately 3,000 people with annual revenues around £60 million. Thorn EMI acquired them in 1982 before shutting down in 1995. Time to return to the convenience foods that made 70s Britain uniquely flavourful. Angel Delight launched in 1967 but peaked during the 1970s. This instant dessert came in butterscotch, strawberry, chocolate and banana flavours. Birds sold over 20 million packets annually. The texture was distinctly artificial, somewhere between proper mousse and chemical foam. And another dairy product was absolutely loaded with sugar despite health claims. Ski yogurt launched in 1963 but became a fridge staple in the 70s. This wasn't healthy natural yogurt, it was sweet and absolutely loaded with sugar. Express Dairies produced ski with distinctive flavours, including hazelnut. Each pot contained around 15 grams of sugar. Now for the British confectionery brands competing desperately with American imports. Treats were Mars' answer to M&M's, chocolate buttons with candy shell. They'd been around since 1955, but the 70s saw peak popularity. Treats came in chocolate, peanut, toffee, and orange varieties. The chocolate treats were discontinued in 1984 and replaced with M, and Ms. Mars also produced another completely forgotten chocolate bar with an utterly mystifying name. The Banjo bar launched in 1976 with raisins and peanuts in caramel covered in milk chocolate. Each bar weighed 60 grams and cost around 12 pence. The wrapper featured a cartoon banjo player with no connection to musical instruments. It disappeared in 1984. Time to explore the peculiar household gadgets that were in every 70s home. The tease made was the bedside alarm clock that would wake you by brewing tea. Manufacturers like Goblin and Swan produced hundreds of thousands annually. The device worked through a timer mechanism, boiling water and pouring into a teapot. The tea was invariably lukewarm and stewed. But for dinner parties, nothing screamed suburban sophistication quite like heated cabinets on wheels. The hostess trolley was the must-have for any dinner party. These wheeled heated cabinets were absolutely enormous, typically over a metre long with heated compartments. Manufacturers like Prestige and Russell Hobbs produced various models costing £40 to over £100. From peculiar household gadgets to the forgotten and bizarre aspects of 70s motoring. Petrol coupons were issued during the 1973 oil crisis, but never actually used. The government printed and distributed over 100 million coupon books at enormous expense. The whole episode cost approximately £8 million for completely unnecessary contingency planning. Even motorway service stations themselves back then were vastly different and surprisingly civilized beasts. Motorway service stations in the 1970s featured proper restaurants with actual chefs preparing food from scratch. Welcome Break and Forte employed qualified chefs to prepare traditional British meals. You could get freshly cooked three-course meals with roast beef and treacle pudding. Speaking of eating out, every British town centre featured these familiar steakhouse chains. Burney Inns operated over 150 restaurants across Britain. Every location followed the same formula: prawn cocktail starters, grilled steaks, and Black Forest Gâteau, served in dimly lit restaurants with red flock wallpaper. They employed over 4,000 people, serving approximately 12 million meals annually. Another popular dining option was Britain's enthusiastic answer to American hamburger chains. Wimpy bars operated over 1,500 locations during their peak. These weren't quite fast food. You sat down at a table and ordered from a waitress. Each restaurant featured orange plastic seats and 4 mica tables. A standard Wimpy burger cost around 40 pence in 1975. Time now for the seriously obscure penny sweets that have vanished completely. Jamboree bags cost 3 pence and contained a completely random selection of sugary treats. The bag might contain sherbet, fruit sweets, chews, or lollipops. Manufacturers like Barrett and Trebor produced millions throughout the 70s. They disappeared during the 1980s, and there were sweets specifically designed to look exactly like actual cigarettes. Sweet cigarettes were sugar sticks packaged in boxes, designed to look like actual cigarette packets. Each stick was white with a red tip to simulate a lit cigarette. Companies like Barrett and Cadet produced millions of packets annually. They were finally banned in 2009. Time for the fizzy drinks that were delivered directly to your doorstep. Corona was delivered to your doorstep in returnable glass bottles by men in vans. The company operated across Britain with a network of local bottling plants. Corona produced lemonade, orangeade, cherryade, and cream soda. They employed over 2,000 people, delivering approximately 50 million bottles annually. Another fizzy drink featured one of the most bizarre advertising campaigns ever. Cresta launched in 1972 with the It's Frothy Man advertising campaign featuring a beardy weirdo in denim. The drink came in cream soda, strawberry, and the controversial Cresta flavour. Each bottle contained particularly aggressive carbonation. Schweppes discontinued Cresta in 1984, back to weekend television that made Saturday afternoons absolutely compulsory viewing. World of Sport ran on ITV every Saturday afternoon from 1965 to 1985. Hosted by Dickie Davies with his distinctive grey streak, it featured everything from wrestling to horse racing. The wrestling segment featuring Big Daddy and giant haystacks became compulsory viewing. Another weekend television fixture featured ordinary families competing for conveyor belt prizes. The Generation Game ran from 1971 to 1982, hosted by Bruce Forsyth with Anthea Redfern. The format involved families competing in skill challenges with the infamous conveyor belt of prizes. The show regularly achieved audiences over 20 million viewers during peak years. Time now to explore some genuinely peculiar and completely unnecessary home products. SodaStream was the home carbonation system letting you make fizzy drinks by injecting CO2 into flavoured syrup. The devices sold over 200,000 units annually. Machines cost around £15 with CO2 cylinders costing approximately £1.50 to exchange. None tasted like the branded drinks they replicated. Another popular kitchen appliance was notorious for creating dangerously lava-hot sandwiches. The Breville sandwich toaster became an absolute kitchen staple, selling over 400,000 units in 1974 alone. This hefty hinged contraption would squash and seal your sandwich while heating it to lava-like temperatures. Every 70s household has horror stories about burning themselves. Let's return to the high street to explore more completely forgotten retailers. John Menzies operated over 200 shops selling newspapers, magazines, books, and stationery. The company originated in Scotland in 1833 but expanded massively post-war. They employed over 4,000 people with annual revenues exceeding £50 million during the mid-70s. For affordable women's fashion, however, this particular chain absolutely dominated every high street. Richard Shops operated over 370 stores during its peak. The company positioned itself as offering stylish, affordable fashion for young women. Most items were priced between £5 and £15. The chain employed approximately 3,500 people with annual sales exceeding £30 million. Now for the toys that kept 70s children simultaneously entertained and frequently injured. Clackers were two acrylic balls on strings that you'd swing to make them hit together. These things were everywhere in 1971, selling for around 50p. The acrylic balls occasionally shattered and sent sharp fragments flying. Multiple children suffered eye injuries. Another popular toy involved bouncing around gardens on giant, inflatable rubber balls. Space hoppers were large rubber balls with handles children would sit on and bounce around. These inflatable toys launched in 1971. The original was orange with an alien face printed on the front. Each required inflating with a bicycle pump to rock hard for maximum bounce. Time now to explore the completely forgotten and peculiar aspects of 70s education. School milk was provided free to all British schoolchildren from 1946 until Margaret Thatcher eliminated the scheme for over 7s in 1971. Every school day featured mid-morning break where children drank a third of a pint from small bottles. Approximately 5 million children received it daily. Speaking of school, some lucky children at school were given the prestigious and envied job of ink monitor. Ink monitors were children appointed to distribute bottles of ink and maintain inkwells before ballpoint pens became universal. This system operated in many schools until the mid-70s. The job was considered prestigious and usually given to responsible pupils. Let's return to the novelty music acts that somehow defined the entire decade. Lieutenant Pigeons scored a #1 hit in 1972 with Mouldy Old Dough, an instrumental novelty track. The song featured the band leader's mother on piano. It sold over 500,000 copies and stayed at #1 for 4 weeks. But does anyone remember the Goodies? The Goodies scored a genuine hit in 1975 with Funky Gibbon, reaching #4. This wasn't some novelty cash-in, it was a proper disco funk track. It sold over 400,000 copies and spawned a dance craze where people mimed Gibbon movements. Time for the synthetic fashion disasters that somehow defined the entire decade. Crimpline was the synthetic fabric dominating 70s fashion despite being hot, sweaty and prone to static electricity, as This polyester-based material was manufactured by ICI. Crimplene was used for everything from women's dresses to men's suits. It disappeared almost overnight in the early 80s. Another popular fabric during this era was distinctly hippie-ish in its aesthetic appeal. Cheesecloth was the loose-weave cotton fabric used for everything from shirts to curtains during the mid-70s. Cheesecloth garments cost relatively little, with shirts typically selling for £3 to £5. The fabric was perfect for summer wear because it was breathable. Let's explore the completely forgotten and peculiar aspects of 70s pub culture. Baby Cham was the sparkling perry that became huge during the 1970s as women's liberation meant more women drinking in pubs. It was marketed specifically towards women with the distinctive Baby Deer logo. Showerings produced over 100 million bottles annually with just 6% alcohol. For pubgoers wanting something considerably stronger, there was always barley wine available. Barley wine wasn't actually wine, but a strong ale with alcohol content ranging from 8% to 12%. These potent brews were enormously popular, with virtually every brewery producing their own version. Brands like Whitbread's Gold Label were fixtures in every pub. Time to return to the peculiar confectionery brands that somehow shaped the decade. Caramac launched in 1959 but reached peak popularity during the 1970s. This wasn't chocolate despite being sold alongside chocolate bars. It was made from condensed milk and vegetable fat. Each bar weighed 30 grams and cost around 8 pence with distinctly waxy texture. Rowntree also produced another completely forgotten chocolate bar featuring tropical themes. The Cabana bar was Rowntree's tropical-themed chocolate bar with coconut, caramel and cherries. Launched in 1971, the bar featured bright packaging showing palm trees and beaches. Each Cabana weighed 45 grams. Rowntree discontinued it in 1984 when they rationalized their portfolio. Time to explore the electronic technology that defined and dominated 70s homes. Cassette recorders transformed from expensive professional equipment to affordable consumer products during the 1970s. These weren't just playback devices, they allowed home recording of music. A basic cassette recorder cost around £20 in 1975, while sophisticated models could exceed £100. For serious hi-fi enthusiasts who wanted everything together, there were all-in-one systems. Music centers were all-in-one stereo systems combining record player, cassette deck, radio and amplifier. These weren't cheap, costing between £150 and £400. The units typically featured wood effect cabinets blending with 70s furniture aesthetics. Time now for the mediocre cars that somehow defined ordinary British motoring. Morris Marina launched in 1971 as British Leyland's attempt to create a modern family car. They failed spectacularly, creating what many considered the worst car Britain produced. British Leyland manufactured over 807,000 Marinas between 1971 and 1980, despite being objectively terrible. To be fair, not absolutely all 70s British cars were complete disasters, though. Hillman Avenger arrived in 1970 as Chrysler UK's attempt to create a modern small family car. Unlike the Marina, the Avenger was decent, featuring relatively modern mechanicals. Chrysler manufactured approximately 638,000 Avengers between 1970 and 1981. Time for some seriously obscure television programs that have been completely forgotten. The Liverbirds ran on BBC One from 1969 to 1979, following two young women sharing a flat in Liverpool. Starring Nerys Hughes and Polly James, it pulled in audiences of 15 to 18 million. The show depicted independent young women living without husbands. Another sitcom was hugely controversial and problematic, even in the supposedly liberal 70s. Love Thy Neighbour ran on ITV from 1972 to 1976, depicting the relationship between a white couple and their black neighbours. The show was hugely controversial in the 70s, featuring racial language absolutely unacceptable today. It regularly pulled in audiences exceeding 15 million viewers. Let's return once more to the high street for more forgotten shops. Woolworths operated over 1,000 stores across Britain during the 1970s. The chain sold everything from pick and mix sweets to vinyl records. Woolworths employed over 30,000 people with annual revenues exceeding £300 million. The pick and mix sweet counter was legendary. From pick and mix to pick and dispense. Timothy White's was the pharmacy and chemist that operated in absolutely every town. Timothy White's was the pharmacy and chemist chain operating approximately 600 stores. The company merged with Boots' rival Taylor's in 1935. The shop sold medicines, toiletries, and photographic supplies. They employed several thousand people during the mid-70s. Time now for some seriously forgotten and peculiar beverages from the decade. Top Deck Shandy was Whitbread's pre-mixed lager and lemonade drink, launching in 1973. The drink contained 1.2% alcohol, making it weak enough for women and younger drinkers. Whitbread manufactured Top Deck at various breweries across England in distinctive packaging. Another British cola brand attempted heroically to compete with the American giants. Bongo was the exotic fruit drink with the unforgettable jingle, Bongo, they drink it in the Congo. Libby's launched it with packaging featuring cartoon jungle animals. The drink came in tropical fruit flavours and was marketed as adventurous refreshment. The advertising was so effective that people still remember the jingle decades later. Time now for some forgotten toys and games that entertained 70s children. Buckaroo launched in Britain in 1970 and became one of the decade's most popular children's games. The premise involved carefully loading items onto a plastic mule until it suddenly bucked. Buckaroo cost around £3.50 at launch, providing reliable entertainment. Now for something that created intricate mathematical patterns through surprisingly simple mechanical principles. Spirograph was the mathematical drawing toy creating intricate geometric patterns using plastic gears and wheels. The toy had been around since the 1960s but reached peak popularity during the mid-70s. Spirograph sets ranged from basic versions costing around £2 up to deluxe sets. Spirograph used to a popular Christmas game for many households, but so was this next game, especially for the kids. Fuzzy Felt was the creative toy featuring felt shapes you'd arrange on fabric boards to create pictures. The sets came in various themes including farms, circuses and houses. Children spent hours creating scenes with the coloured felt pieces. These kits were hugely popular Christmas presents despite felt pieces ending up everywhere in the house. Time for the frozen food products that somehow defined convenient 70s dining. Bird's Eye Steakhouse grills were frozen reformed meat products launched in 1971. These weren't actual steaks but compressed beef shaped into steak-like rectangles. Bird's Eye manufactured multiple varieties, including original, peppercorn and chicken at approximately £1.20 for a box of 8. They used to go great with chips or even some mash. On that subject, Smash promised completely instant mashed potato, made from dehydrated powder in packets. Smash was Cadbury's instant mashed potato product launching in 1968, but reaching peak popularity through advertising, featuring Martian robots laughing at humans who peeled potatoes. The product consisted of dehydrated potato granules reconstituting with boiling water. Time now for the final, forgotten and peculiar aspects of everyday 70s life. Green Shield stamps were the loyalty scheme operating across Britain during the 1960s and 70s. Shoppers would collect stamps in books, with full books exchangeable for goods from catalogues. The scheme operated massively, with over 20 million British households collecting stamps. Shockingly, some working-class homes still completely lacked even basic indoor facilities. Outdoor toilets were still common in working-class housing during the early 1970s. The toilet would be located in a separate building in the backyard with no heating. Using an outdoor toilet during winter was genuinely miserable. Time for more forgotten penny sweets that vanished completely without trace. Toffos were the individual toffees wrapped in waxed paper that came in multiple flavours. Each sweet was rock hard and could last for ages. The slogan, "A man's gotta chew what a man's gotta chew," became iconic. Mars discontinued them in the early 1980s. Another incredibly popular forgotten sweet was all about the Fizzy Sherbet Centre. Refreshers were the fizzy sweet tablets that fizzed on your tongue. These small circular sweets came in various fruit flavours and cost just a penny each. The distinctive Sherbet Centre created an intense fizzing sensation. They were manufactured by Swizzles, from penny sweets to the fizzy drinks that quenched 70s thirst. Tizer was the bright red fizzy drink with the slogan, "The Appetizer." While it still exists today, the 70s version tasted completely different with a distinctive flavour nobody could quite identify. It came in returnable glass bottles delivered by local bottlers. Another orange squash concentrate competed fiercely for limited refrigerator shelf space. Quash was the orange squash concentrate that competed with Robinson's. Each bottle made dozens of drinks when diluted with water. The distinctive orange and yellow label was instantly recognizable. Beecham manufactured it until the brand was eventually discontinued. Time for more forgotten television programs that dominated the viewing schedule. Crossroads ran from 1964 to 1988, but the 70s was its golden era. This soap opera, set in a Birmingham motel, regularly pulled in over 15 million viewers. The show was notorious for wobbly sets and forgotten lines. ATV produced it on shoestring budgets. Another show brought working men's club-style variety entertainment to Saturday nights. Wheel Tappers and Shunters Social Club ran from 1974 to 1977, recreating a working men's club atmosphere. The show featured variety acts, comedians and singers performing to a studio audience seated at tables with pints. Granada Television produced it from Manchester. Time to explore more forgotten shops that once dominated the high street. Kelsey Girl was the fashion retailer that operated over 500 stores during the 1970s. The chain sold affordable, trendy clothing aimed at young women and teenagers. Prices were extremely competitive, making fashion accessible to working-class shoppers. The brand eventually became River Island. Dulcis was another women's shoe shop fixture on absolutely every high street. Dulcis was the women's shoe retailer that operated hundreds of stores across Britain. The chain was owned by British Shoe Corporation and positioned as offering more fashionable options than Freeman Hardy Willis. Dulcis employed thousands of people during the mid-70s. Time for more forgotten household items and peculiar kitchen gadgets. Egg coddlers were porcelain containers for cooking eggs gently in boiling water. Royal Worcester manufactured the finest versions with decorative patterns. Each coddler cost several pounds and came with a screw-top lid. They produced perfectly soft-boiled eggs every time. Time for more forgotten British cars from the turbulent decade. The Ford Capri Mk1 launched in 1969, but dominated the early 70s as the car you always promised yourself. This affordable sports coupe featured long bonnet and sleek styling. Ford sold millions across Europe. The Mk1 version is now highly collectible. British Leyland also produced another hugely controversial and generally awful car design. The Austin Maxi launched in 1969 as Britain's first 5-door hatchback. Despite innovative design, the car suffered from awful gearbox and poor driving dynamics. British Leyland manufactured over 470,000 Maxis between 1969 and 1981. The cable-operated gear change was particularly notorious. Time for more forgotten music acts that briefly dominated the charts. Peters and Lee were the singing duo who won Opportunity Knocks in 1973. Lenny Peters was blind and Diane Lee was his guide. Their biggest hit, Welcome Home, reached number 1 in 1973 and sold over 800,000 copies. They remained popular throughout the mid-70s. Another big group of that era, Middle of the Road, had multiple number 1 hits despite critical dismissal. Middle of the Road were the Scottish pop group who scored 3 number 1 hits between 1971 and 1972. Chirpy, Chirpy, Cheep, Cheep sold over 10 million copies worldwide. Their distinctive pop sound dominated early 70s radio despite critical dismissal. Time for more forgotten fashion trends that swept through the decade. Maxi skirts were the floor-length skirts that became fashionable around 1970. These flowing garments came in various fabrics from denim to floral prints. Every woman owned at least one maxi skirt during the early 70s. They vanished when hemlines rose again. From floor-length skirts to barely their shorts, hot pants represented the complete opposite extreme in terms of hemline length. Hot pants were the extremely short shorts that became fashionable in 1971. These weren't just for summer, women wore them with tights in winter. Pans people famously wore hot pants on top of the pops. The trend lasted just a few years. Time for more forgotten convenience food products from the decade. Spangles meals were the frozen ready meals sold by Findus featuring the Spangles brand. These weren't related to the sweets, but used the same name. The range included traditional British meals like cottage pie and chicken curry. They disappeared in the early 1980s. Another dehydrated convenience food product promised authentic restaurant quality at home. Vesta paella was the dehydrated rice dish that bore no resemblance to actual Spanish paella. The box contained rice, dehydrated seafood, and yellow colouring for authenticity. Like all Vesta products, it tasted distinctly of chemicals and British interpretation of foreign cuisine. Time for more forgotten fizzy drinks produced by various regional bottlers across Britain. Cidrax was the fizzy apple drink that tasted nothing like actual cider. This bright green beverage came in glass bottles and was popular with children. The distinctive taste was completely artificial. Various regional bottlers produced it under license throughout the 70s. Cider to cream soda, R. White's manufactured considerably more than just their famous lemonade. R. White's cream soda was the pink fizzy drink that tasted vaguely of vanilla. This distinctive beverage came in returnable glass bottles with the R. White's branding. The cream soda was popular at children's parties throughout the decade. Time now for the final forgotten items from the decade. Gobstoppers were the large spherical hard sweets that changed colour as you sucked them. Each layer revealed a different colour, creating a rainbow effect. These jaw-breaking sweets could last for hours. They came in jars at corner shops. Now, who remembers sherbet fountains? Sherbet fountains were the cardboard tubes filled with sherbet powder and a licorice straw. You dip the licorice into the sherbet and suck. Each fountain cost just a few pence. The combination of licorice and sherbet was distinctly British. You could also get flying saucers, which delivered fizzy sherbet powder in completely edible rice paper shells. Flying saucers were the rice paper discs filled with sherbet powder. These virtually weightless sweets dissolved on your tongue, releasing sharp sherbet. They were sold by weight at corner shops for just pennies. The rice paper stuck to the roof of your mouth. Time for some forgotten children's programs that defined after-school viewing. Bagpuss ran for just 13 episodes in 1974, but became one of the most beloved children's programs ever made. This stop-motion animation featured a saggy old cloth cat and his friends in a shop. Each episode was exactly 15 minutes long. Another children's program, The Clangers, featured knitted creatures communicating through whistles on a tiny blue planet. The Clangers ran from 1969 to 1974, featuring knitted mouse-like creatures living on a small planet. Created by Oliver Postgate and Peter Furman, the characters communicated through whistles. The program featured the Soup Dragon and the Froglets. Time to explore more forgotten shops that once dominated the high street. Hepworths was the menswear retailer operating hundreds of stores across Britain. The chain specialised in suits and formal wear for working men. Hepworths employed thousands during the 70s. The company eventually became Next in the 1980s. Now for a name you might recognise, but perhaps not quite in the same way as today. Currys originally sold bicycles and motorcycles before focusing on electronics. During the 70s, many branches still had bicycle departments. The company gradually phased out cycles to concentrate on televisions and washing machines. The transition completed by the early 1980s. Time for more forgotten penny sweets sold from corner shop jars. Fruit salad chews were the small rectangular sweets that tasted vaguely of fruit. These incredibly cheap sweets cost just a halfpenny each. They came in distinctive pink and yellow wrappers. The flavour was completely artificial but somehow addictive. Right next to the fruit salads, you'd find this gem of a sweet. Blackjacks were the aniseed-flavoured chews that turned your tongue black. These sweets cost the same halfpenny as fruit salads and were sold alongside them. The intense aniseed flavour wasn't for everyone. They came in black wrappers. Time for more forgotten home entertainment technology from the decade. Betamax was Sony's video cassette format that launched in 1975. Despite being technically superior to VHS, Betamax lost the format war. The tapes were smaller and offered better quality but shorter recording time. Sony finally discontinued Betamax in the early 2000s. For recording and playing music, there was the chunky 8-track cartridge format. 8-track cartridges were the tape format that briefly competed with cassettes in the early 70s. These chunky cartridges contained endless loop tape that played continuously. Car manufacturers installed 8-track players as standard. The format died out by the late 1970s. One final forgotten item is the traditional pub game that sparked genuinely fierce competition. Shove a Penny was the pub game played on polished wooden boards where you'd slide coins into marked zones. The game required genuine skill and featured in many 70s pubs. Tournaments were common with serious prize money. Electronic games gradually replaced traditional pub games. If you enjoyed this journey through forgotten Britain, you'll love 15 forgotten sandwiches, only true Brits. Remember, these 100 forgotten things from 1970s. Britain prove how completely our lives have transformed in barely 50 years. Some, like outdoor toilets and Morris Marinas, deserve to vanish, but the loss of genuinely brilliant innovations like chopper bikes and Texan Bars makes Britain slightly less interesting than the distinctly homegrown culture we once had.